Hey there, RosterWatch Nation. It's your friendly neighborhood trash man. Back with the news of today so far and yesterday afternoon when um we had our last cast, or at least Alex and Cody did. Let's start with the fantasy football news. Aaron Rodgers has signed a 2-year deal with the Steelers, according to CTESPN, more commonly known as Antonio Brown. Antonio Brown is assured that Aaron Rodgers is going to the Steelers on a 2-year deal. Um, Although it's reported now that Aaron Rodgers is not even sure where he's going exactly yet. He's deciding between the Giants and the Steelers, both lauded, vaunted football programs. I mean, if I had to choose, I would probably go to the Steelers. I mean, it's just a much better team at this point, but I don't know that Aaron Rodgers is that worried about being on a much better team, considering he was just, the quarterback of the Jets. But I would imagine that he would go to the Steelers. He says it's all about the situation and fit, not about money, which I can actually believe, as Rodgers is probably printing money at this point, or maybe he doesn't even believe in money at this point. I don't really know. Rodgers is an interesting guy. But the Steelers, they just added DK Metcalf to their receiving core, so that's a nice carrot to dangle in front of Rodgers. Steelers already have George Pickens. That would be arguably one of the most dynamic outside duos in football. And although I don't know if Aaron Rodgers is even a marquee quarterback anymore. I mean, like, is he even anyone that we're banking on? I mean, where are you drafting Aaron Rodgers in fantasy? You know, I mean, we already don't draft quarterbacks until around the 10th round at roster watch. Where are you drafting Aaron Rodgers? Where does he even go? I mean, is he a top 10 quarterback on either one of those teams? I mean, we saw that he wasn't the quarterback that he used to be for the Jets. Are we expecting him to just, turn a corner? Harry Snowman says that he could function like an old Big Ben, but he couldn't. Old Big Ben could just lean forward and pick up 5 yards. Aaron Rodgers can't do that. He's not the physical presence that Big Ben was. Um, yeah, it's not an enticing option for me, really. I think this is actually, I mean, it could be a downgrade for DK Metcalf. Aaron Rodgers could be a downgrade from Geno Smith. I mean, I perish the thought, but I'd say, I mean, just on a consistency basis, I mean, like, what are we getting from Rodgers on a week to week basis? Um, like I said, Rodgers is 41, which in quarterback years, I guess, isn't that old, considering Tom Brady played, his last season at 57. But Brady is a special case. Aaron Rodgers, I'm starting to believe, is not. I'm starting to believe I mean, much like Russell Wilson, I think, at some point in the last 2, 3 years, it just fell off a cliff. And I don't think he's coming back, at least not the way that we've known him in the past. Demarcus Robinson, formerly of the Rams, and formerly a good player on the Rams. I mean, a guy you could play in against, a guy who was commonly found in the garbage grab. Signed to a 2-year, $9.5 million contract with the 49ers. Brandon Ayuk has to be turning in his soon-to-be grave. I say that in jest. Um, Robinson's deal, $6 million of it is guaranteed. He's 30 years old. And he joins, a rival team to his Rams. He's coming off a season. He had over 500 yards, 7 touchdowns on just 31 catches for the Rams in 2024. He'll likely be the third or fourth option for the 49ers. And he's I see him maybe having a similar type season to he did in 2024. Maybe not as many touchdowns, but half the way to 1,000 yards and 4 or 5 touchdowns. I could see that happening for Robinson. I could see him finding his way to the garbage grab once in a while as a 49er. It doesn't really move the needle for me in fantasy, but there isn't a Cooper Kupp, there isn't a Puka Nacua in San Francisco. I mean, they have some good receivers. I mean, Ricky Pearsall, really took a step forward. Juwan Jennings, the same. Deebo Samuel's gone to the Commanders. And then you have our boy Ayuk, who may or may not be there once the season starts. So, I guess things could work out for DeMarcus Robinson. Harry Snowman's asking, my question is, what running back are the Steelers drafting? It's really hard to place running backs after, Genty. I feel like there are 2 or 3 teams that could take him, but with everyone else, it's such a deep running back field, and they're running backs that have such, I guess, diverse skill sets. It's going to be hard to tell who's going to go where, at least this early on. The Steelers could really take anyone. But let me get back. I'm going to think about that, and I'll come back tomorrow with some options. But yeah, that would be a fun little mind exercise to go along with my nightly gamesonchess.com. In more football news, the Chiefs have restructured Patrick Mahomes' contract. It'll save $49.4 million against the salary cap. This is after they went nuts in free agency on a left tackle and Jalen Moore and cornerback Christian Fulton. The Chiefs will pay out for players who aren't wide receivers or running backs, apparently. Mahomes had been slated to count as a $66 million cap hit in 2025. Jeez. Mahomes is signed through the 2031 season. Let's be honest, he's signed for life for the Chiefs. I would have to think, or as long as Andy Reid's there. So yeah, Chiefs making more good decisions with their team. Oh, this just came in a few minutes ago. The Titans have agreed to terms with wide receiver Van Jefferson, formerly of the Steelers, on a 1-year, $2.5 million contract. Titans just, aggregating more ho-hum pass catchers. But, I guess this goes along with the news that Nick Westbrook-Ikhine has agreed to terms with the Dolphins on a 2-year, $6.5 million contract, $3.2 million guaranteed. NWI, as I like to call him affectionately, he can stretch the field. He's a good deep play receiver. 9 touchdowns last season, putting Demarcus Robinson to shame. Only had 7, but not as many receiving yards as Robinson, only 497. Robinson had 505, just one more catch. They almost had an identical season, really. Robinson 31, 505 and 7. Westbrook-Ikine 32, 497 and 9. I think NWI got a better deal though. And I mean, just the fact that he has a 2-year deal. He's likely to be the third receiver for the Dolphins, as Robinson will likely be the third receiver for the 49ers. And really, the sky's the limit in Miami, Tua stays healthy, but, he's got competition there. So I wouldn't depend on him on a weekly basis. But you could see some big weeks out of Westbrook-Ikine, just like you saw for the Titans this past season. So I wouldn't hold it against him to have another, 500-yard, 5+ touchdown season for the Dolphins. Tua gets hurt again, all bets are off for all the receivers, really. As Zach Wilson, I think, is the first line of offense after Tua at this point. So all bets are off then. But, it'll be interesting to see what Westbrook-Ikine does there. I mean, nobody's drafting him anywhere in 12-team or smaller leagues. I mean, I could see him in a 16-team league, or even a 14-team late. But we're not drafting him otherwise. Another guy we're probably not drafting otherwise, but you're definitely not drafting otherwise. Jacoby Brissett, formerly of the Patriots, now a Cardinal. Brissett, actually a pretty decent quarterback, as far as protecting the ball. Holds the all-time interception percentage record at 1.4%. Took a beating in New England before coming to Arizona. If Kyler Murray misses games, Jacoby Brissett will hold court. But it's not an excitement. I think it works okay for Trey McBride. If Jacoby Brissett is under center, I don't think much changes for him. I think he still maintains his role as the primary option in the offense at that point. But as far as Harrison Jr., who I'm not banking on much anyways, it's funny. I go back to preseason last year, joint practices between the Cardinals and the Colts. And I was watching practices, and I come back to report afterwards to Alex and Cody, and I talk about everybody else except for Marvin Harrison Jr. And they're like, why don't you talk about Marvin Harrison Jr.? I was like, because he wasn't doing anything. I didn't see him doing anything. And of course, then we see in the season, he goes through these stretches of really not doing anything. He had some good games for sure. But, he wasn't the receiver that he was purported to be, at least on a weekly basis. So I stand by my preseason evaluation of him. Terminal sarcasm sounds like what I'll probably die of at some point. Says my McBride shares still worry about that scenario. That's fair. But hopefully we don't have to deal with that scenario. Hopefully Murray doesn't get hurt, which, I guess of quarterbacks who could get hurt throughout the season, Murray would be on the top or closer to the top of that list just based on his size. But, with Murray under center, McBride is a top 2-3 tight end, excuse me. With a Brissett under center, he becomes a top 5. That still works for me. I'm still playing him every week. More football news. Speaking of the Chiefs, they signed Robert Tonyan, tight end, formerly of the Vikings, to a 1-year contract. He could catch a couple touchdowns in that offense. Everybody does. He'll be third in the totem pole behind Travis Kelce and Noah Gray. Maybe along with a few others. But not really moving the fantasy needle at all for me. But it's a solid signing for the Chiefs per usual. Adding more role players, guys they can plug and play for Patrick Mahomes to pull offense and pull offensive plays out of nowhere and probably lead the Chiefs back to another AFC division championship. Why not? Somebody probably won't be seeing a championship of any sort this season. Dante Pettis, wide receiver, who actually liked, as a 49er, he's re-signing with the Saints to a 1-year contract. Pretty shallow receiving core for the Saints at this point. Pettis was a former second rounder. Like I said, I liked him as a 49er. I thought he had a future in the NFL and perhaps in fantasy too. But it's likely he'll be more of a special teams contributor this season as a Saint. Free agent wide receivers starting to dwindle. Speaking of wide receivers dwindling, Drake Stoops, son of famed Oklahoma coach Bob Stoops, and a guy that Byron actually liked at the Shrine Bowl last year. Actually made some decent cuts. Caught a lot of balls inside. He has been suspended 2 games for violating the NFL's policy on performing-enhancing substances. Based on his size, his frame is probably a growth-enhancing substance. At least we'd hope for it to be. Anyway, he's out of the first 2 games of the regular season. I don't know. He might not even make the team. Actually, the only reason he's probably in the news right now is because he is Bob Stoops' son. But there you have it, in case you were hoping to run Stoops out there. If he did make the team, at least for the first 2 games of the season, you won't be able to at this point. Somebody else you might be able to actually run out onto the field, though. Jeremy McNichols, running back for the Commanders, re-signed to a 1-year contract to operate as the change of pace back behind Brian Robinson Jr. McNichols had some decent games last season, it seemed. It seems like most offensive players, tied to the arm of Daniels there in Washington, had a decent game at one point or another last season. He's just the kind of quarterback who elevates his team. McNichols, 261 yards on 55 carries with 4 touchdowns last season. Probably not going to be somebody we're having to rely on in fantasy this year. I hope not. But the Commanders have him just in case. Brian Robinson could go down again. It seems like he's kind of got a little bit of the injury bug, so we could see McNichols from time to time. But again, hopefully not. Another Saint that was re-signed, tight end Juwan Johnson, signed to a 3-year contract. 30.75 million base value and a max value of 34.5 million with 21.75 million guaranteed. All right. Not bad for a 28-year-old tight end, who is coming off the best season of his career. 548 yards, 3 touchdowns, 50 catches. He's the kind of guy that Derek Carr can rely on. And hopefully it's not Derek Carr, though. Hopefully it's someone else for fantasy purposes. But, he's somebody in a pinch you can stream on a weekly basis, or on a week-to-week basis, rather, in fantasy. Juwan Johnson is. If the tight end field is anything like it was in 2024. 2024 might have been the worst season overall for tight ends that I can remember as far as fantasy goes. Where you could... Oh, Harry Snowman. He's got to fly. Everybody say bye to Harry. Always a stout contributor to the chat. Can always rely on him. Solid dude. I think he's a dude. Probably a dude. He's Harry, and he's a snowman. So probably a dude. But yeah, Juwan Johnson, plug and play, depending on the situation this season. In more football news, the Bills agreed to terms with running back Darrynton Evans, formerly of the Bears, and I think formerly of the Titans before them. Journeyman. He appeared in 5 games for the Bears, rushing 3 times for 3 yards. And this actually isn't the first time Evans has played with the Bills. He was a Bill for the 2023 training camp. Found his way to injured reserve and then cut later that season. This really has no resounding impact on fantasy. Ty Johnson could be out of there in Buffalo. Could be the end of his run as a Bill. They're basically the same player. So that's really the only implication there, unless anybody else can think of one. Can anybody think of one? One that's worthwhile? While you're thinking, the Cowboys re-signed wide receiver KaVontae Turpin to a 3-year, $18 million contract. Cowboys keep doing things that underwhelm me. At least for the past almost 30 years now, as a Cowboys fan. Anyway, like I said, a 3-year, $18 million contract. Turpin will reportedly be the highest special teams player in NFL history, and I guess maybe he deserves it. Really good kick returner. Although maybe he doesn't deserve it. You know who deserved it? It was the guy who played for the Bears years ago. It was Devin. I'm going to think of his last name. But it seemed like every time he, fielded a kick, he scored a touchdown. Who am I thinking of? But good for KaVontae Turpin. Gadget player. Someone else who will probably be a gadget player throughout the season. Zay Jones signed to a 1-year, $4.4 million contract with the Cardinals. You hear my baby girl in the background? Not a real baby girl. She's also a hairy baby girl. Jones played only 257 snaps last year. None of them relevant for fantasy. You got guys like Michael Wilson, like Harrison Jr. already said. Greg Dortch, my man, Greg Dortch, who was actually the most impressive receiver that I saw for the Cardinals, at least last preseason. Devin Hester, that's right. Thank you, Terminal Sarcasm. This is Devin Hester. I think he probably should go down as the highest paid special teams player in history. He was electric. Wow. Yeah, thanks for that, Terminal Sarcasm. But anyway, yeah, Zay Jones, age 30 season. Nothing really doing there. Kenneth Gainwell added to the Steelers' backfield. Maybe that, lessens the weight of a running back pick in the draft for the Steelers. Gainwell, former Eagle, he's only 25. I feel like Gainwell's one of those guys, he feels like he's been in the league for a decade. But he's only 25. Never had more than 84 touches in a season, carries rather. This is one guy, though, who I think will probably get more action on his new team than he did on his old team. I actually kind of like this for Gainwell, at least at this point. We'll see what happens as far as the draft goes. But really, all he has in front of him is Jaylen Warren. And I don't know that Jaylen Warren is a better running back than Kenneth Gainwell. Gainwell, he's had some decent outings for the Eagles. I think he could actually compete with Warren for touches in Pittsburgh. But again, we don't know what they're going to do as far as the draft goes. They're going to add a running back, at least one. But that is an interesting bit of news. There was one more bit I wanted to talk about before I got out of here this morning, and that was DeAndre Hopkins, formerly the Chiefs, signed with the Ravens to a one-year contract. The deal will pay Hopkins $5 million with a chance to grow to $6 million with incentives. He'll be there along with some pretty decent wide receivers. But then, this offense runs through Lamar Jackson. It runs through Derrick Henry. It runs through their tight ends. He's averaged just 1.71 yard per route in his last season of football in 2024. I can't imagine Hopkins having much fantasy value for the Ravens this season. But it's nice to see him keep up the good fight. Love Hopkins throughout his career. Quiet guy, lets his football speak for him. And thank you for letting me speak for you, speak my football for you, RosterWatch Nation, this morning. Stay tuned for more, dare I say, round-the-clock coverage. We're trying something different here at RosterWatch, and I hope you enjoy it. Anyway, until next time, this is the Trash Man.
This is Anthony Richardson, and you're listening to RosterWatch.
This is AJ Brown, and you're listening to RosterWatch.
This is Josh Allen, and you're listening to